and the government of Turkey, of course, they are now registered. This lobbying firm for Hastert is registered under Foreign Agents Registration Act. And again, there's been nothing in the press saying, "Oh yeah, this came up."
Well, when Vanity Fair reported this, and it was an exhaustive expose, frankly, it was I can't remember how many thousands of words it was, but I mean they went into great detail after the Vanity Fair story. Did the other media, AP, New York Times, Washington Post, did they pick the story up in any way to advance what he had to say? I mean, just amongst the many remarkable things he had to say.
Not one.
And they were alleging the Speaker of the House, this was at the time that he was the Speaker of the House, and they were alleging that he was accepting thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars from these Turkish foreign agents, correct?
And Brad, this was not based on my testimony. This article was written with really strict conditions on the author, on the investigative journalist. Usually they require 2 to 3 sources. In this case, for this particular case, because the Speaker of the House was involved, because of the case being high profile, they required more than 4 or 5 sources. So that's what this reporter got. And you know how they usually do fact-checking after the article is submitted by the reporter.
Right.
Well, in this case, they did triple fact-checking. They did it 3 times, going back to every single source. And so they really did their homework. And again, this is not an alternative media outlet. You were looking at Vanity Fair.
Vanity Fair.
They have 2 million circulation number, and yet not a single, not one newspaper or network channel or cable, nobody reported on it. There was this deafening silence, and you reported on it, so you should go.
I did report on it at Brad Blog, and you say nobody reported on it. I think what you mean is nobody in this country, because the story did get picked up in. Did it get picked up in Turkey?
Absolutely. In Turkey, it ended up becoming the front page story for a week or so on every single newspaper, not one, not 2, but every single newspaper. And it was covered by CNN Turk in Turkey. And it was covered by all their networks and the radio stations and everywhere. And nothing here. So
CNN actually covered it, just their Turkish language version of their cable channel.
Correct.
Unbelievable. What do you, and we're going to get into this in a bit, your new project where you're essentially outing the folks in the media who aren't doing their jobs, Project Expose MSM, but what do you attribute the fact that nobody, after this stunning expose in Vanity Fair, and of course several years later when you allowed me to announce at Brad Blog that you were ready to tell all, to what do you attribute that the U.S. media did not then pick up the story, has still not today picked up the story?
Right. There are many factors, and if people go to the website 123realchange.blogspot.com, I have done several series of 4 or 5 part series on the various factors contributing to this. You know, we have everybody has been talking about the mainstream media today becoming the extension of the government. They've been this way for a long time, but the extent of it is mind-boggling today. And also, you have lazy journalism. You have, to a certain degree, actually to a large degree, this reliance on the government, inside government forces, high-level officials, meaning, let's say a reporter, well-known reporter, let's say with the New York Times or Newsweek, has a high-level source in the Justice Department, and getting their stories and getting their confirmations or denials from those people, and in many cases being told by their sources not to run a story. And we have had several cases of that. And in this, for this project, my case is only one that we have had as a report, but I am going to report that I have been reporting other cases. As you know, the last one was on Time Magazine and the Drug Enforcement Agency, DEA agents, and these are high-level DEA agents who reported a very, very serious case with all the documents, the supporting documents, and we're looking at 3-4 high-level DEA agents, and these were not what they labeled as disgruntled employees. We're looking at SES level, senior executive level, special agents in charge with DEA, taking the story, explosive story, to the Time Magazine with all the backing documents, supporting documents, and they were censored. The story was blacked out.
Somebody blacked it out, and and that's what I'm trying to figure out. Was it that they were lazy, didn't bother to report it, or there were reporters who wanted to report it, but they were held back by their by their bosses, by the government, perhaps, who said, "Oh no, don't run this story; it's too explosive."
And we don't know the answers. And sometimes some of this stuff gets to be known publicly, as you know, with the AT&T whistleblower. He went to the LA Times and he gave the story to this reporter, and the reporter was solid. He was good. The reporter gave it to his editor, and the editor, what did he do? He notified the NSA and told them that they had a source who had given them the story. And then, based on the instruction the editor got, the LA Times editor got, he sat on the story for 5 months and blacked it out, didn't publish.
Was that LA Times or New York Times, Sibel?
No, this was LA Times.
Okay, hold the thought. I got to get to a break. Speaking with Sibel Edmonds, former FBI translator, whistleblower, founder and director of the National Security Whistleblowers Coalition. She's telling her story, and we're taking your calls at 877-520-1150. That's 877-520-1150. Not Malloy's usual number. Don't bother them. They're on vacation. Bother us. We'd love to talk to you. Sibel, of course, I have more questions for you, but so do our callers. You want to hit some of those?
Sure.
All right. Yeah, what's that, Dad? Okay. Let me get to some of these calls. And where am I? Jeremy. There we go. Jeremy in Huntington Beach. Welcome to the show, Jeremy. You have a question for Sibel Edmonds.
I actually did have somewhat of a statement/question. That is, we seem to have a kind of a long history of arming our enemies and harming both sides of a conflict. Clear back to World War II, I think, what was it, Union Banking or something like that. Prescott Bush, his bank or whatever, was laundering money for the Nazis. Of course, you could forget the Iran-Contra incident. We were arming Iran and Iraq. And needless to say, Saddam Hussein, we were arming him to the teeth. He was a nobody before we got our hands on him. Gave him all his weapons, chemical, biological, even pre-nuclear precursors in some cases, from what I read. It just seems to me that the most paranoid part of me seems to think, you got to wonder if there's some people inside of our government or certain Western companies that actually want us to be defeated. It's always been understood that, if real defeat in military conflict would welcome basically it would kill democracy.
Jeremy, let me phrase that in a form of a question since we're coming up at the top of the hour. Sibel, can it be that rather than a few rogue bad apples, if you will, even though they're incredibly high-ranking bad apples, can it be that this is actually the policy of this government somehow to allow these nuclear secrets and so forth to get out around the country?
Well, you're looking at a business. You're looking at the military-industrial complex, and that's a business, okay? And we sustain, and it sustains itself with conflicts and wars. Think about it. Right now, if we didn't have this conflict that we created ourselves in Afghanistan, and then let's say it was in late 1990s we had the Albania and Kosovo, every single one of these sustains the military-industrial complex. Think about a very peaceful world. These conflicts and wars, who are they going to sell it to?
But would these
guys... They're going to go out of business.
Well, it's one thing to have continue the war, but would these guys be psychotic enough to want to arm some of these countries with nuclear weapons just to keep this military-industrial complex going, Sibel?
But then you're looking at a totally different issue. When you're looking at, let's say, Pakistan with the nuclear and obtaining the nuclear facilities, and
right.
This is with A.Q. Khan in 1980s. This was when everything was played, every single strategy was based on the Cold War. And it was, okay, Pakistan, ally, and every country would want to have this. We back then said it was deterrent, and we were going to use it as deterrent. Why other countries can't use that as deterrent? And who has used these nuclear weapons throughout the history of the nuclear industry except us?
Well,
we're the only nation that has a history of really going and using it with our Hiroshima.
Yep. All right.
So therefore, these countries, they have their own set of reasons to acquire it. You have the military-industrial complex with selling the business and conflicts. And during the Cold War, we looked the other ways when our allies, so-called allies, obtained this technology. And in some cases, some people within our governments made money off of it.
Some people made a lot of money.